my daughter, who was about to turn 18, came into my office. She had a big grin on her face and she said, "Papa, no offense, but I don't want to live with you anymore." What keeps us from becoming who we can be? Holding on to who we are.
Whoa, wow, whoa, wow, whoa, wow. You wanna know I'm breakable?
How many times have you wanted to just let it all go? Like literally go minimalist, leave your problems behind. Well, today we're going to be talking with Daniel Aaron, who is a minimalist nomad. So he's got the best of both worlds there, and I can't believe that we get a chance to talk about what he's been doing for quite some time now. And since he decided to actually make a huge change in his life, you might call him the transformational storyteller, the spiritual teacher, the best-selling author. He's a black belt in judo, but he's also a pacifist. He's a reverend, an ordained priest, but he's also not religious. This man breaks open so many things and fills the cracks with light through books, live broadcasts, coaching practices. I mean, you name it. I'm super excited to bring Daniel Aaron to you guys today. Welcome, Daniel, to Unbreakable.
Awesome. Thank you. So good to be with you, George.
So tell me, first off, what was the most profound breakthrough that you had when you decided to go minimalist and go nomad, changing that life?
Okay, yeah. Well, it was sparked this way just over a year ago, and I've been a nomad and a minimalist at other eras of my life when I was even younger than I am now. Um, and a little over a year ago, my daughter, who was about to turn 18, came into my office. She had a big grin on her face, and she said, "Papa, no offense, but I don't want to live with you anymore." And we had a good chuckle. She's about to graduate high school. We'd been in that discussion, what happens after high school. She'd been with me primarily, just her and I, her whole life. And so my first response was like, "No, I don't want you to go." And then my second response, "How cool that she's got the confidence and courage to launch out on her own. I love it. She's ready to soar." And as soon as I said it once, I was like, I'm an empty nester. I was like, ugh, that tastes, I don't like that. Like, I don't want to define my life by what's missing. And then, like, the next day it came to me, you know what? It's time for me to soar on a new level too. And I just got a really clear guidance, intuition, let go of everything you can. Um, and and so that was a process of a couple months, just letting go, selling, giving away things. And it's been over a year now.
So would you say it was a trauma around that, or was it something that's been boiling to the point where you're just like, you know what, time to go ahead and just release the valve?
I, I don't feel like it was a trauma. Maybe, I don't know. I have probably a high threshold for pain. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a trauma. It was, on some level, like I had 18 years where being a father was my primary focus, like the most important thing to me. And it's still super important, though. Hey, my daughter doesn't need me in the same ways anymore. So it took some adjustment. Like there was pain in it for sure. Like, wow, I love this being so much. I love us being together. And that's the way nature made it. This is appropriate. This is exactly what needs to happen. The funny thing, I'll tell you, this last part of it was afterwards, I got clear. My first stop, I was in Hawaii at the time. We were living in Hawaii. My first stop is to go to Martha's Vineyard, a place that was really important for me in my early 20s. And so a few days later, I spoke to my daughter and I was like, "Hey, I'm going to the vineyard." Her response was, "Can I come?" And so my response to her was, "Yes, but you can't live with me."
Little payback, right?
We're honoring her wish, yeah. And she did end up coming, and lived with sort of like extended family, and so it was our first time not living together, and it was awesome.
So what got you into the idea? What came first, minimalism or the nomad concept?
Well, all the spiritual masters say we should be nomads, as in me nomad at you, you nomad at me. Um, I think it was the minimalist part though that came first for me. I had a couple times I'd read the book 10x is easier than 2x, and I had some ambitions and desires to really multiply my mission, my influence, what I'm doing in the world, my income as well. And I grok that concept that what keeps us from becoming who we can be, this is the way apparently Lao Tzu said it, is holding on to who we are. Right? And so the idea of making a 10x leap in my life was connected to, well, how much can I let go of? And the way Benjamin Hardy puts it in the book is the 10x version of you is somebody who doesn't have 80% of what the current person has. And it's not just
Mm.
physical stuff, it's attitudes, behaviors, activities, focus, all of it, though the stuff is part of it. And one of the best discoveries for me in the process is I have so much more energy, right? So much more energy for what's important to me rather than managing all the stuff.
How do you delegate or make those decisions? I mean, let me kind of frame this.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of people, they work their whole life and they focus on retirement. They're like, hey, you know what? When I can finally get to that point where I can string up those two hammocks in between my two favorite trees that I've watched the last 40 years grow in my yard, waiting for that one day that's going to be the magical day, right? Where I'm going to get my coffee, I'm going to get my hammock, and I'm good, right? You got a little dog next to you, whatever the scenario is. And they're planning for this part in their life. And then a lot of people who are retirees, you can only sit there and watch reruns of MASH or something like that for maybe a month, couple weeks, maybe a couple months if you really have nothing going on in your life. And then they're looking for the next thing, especially entrepreneurs, because they just can't seem to stop. They fill the gaps with something new. They'll sell their business thinking that they're going to, they're cashing out, they're exiting, and they end up getting into some other project that consumes maybe even more time, from them. So the question for you is when you said, being able to focus more on the things that matter, are you replacing multitasking in your mind with that same amount of time just on one thing? And if you're doing that, how big of a leap are you seeing in your productivity and actually hitting your goal faster? Or is it something different entirely?
Hmm. Beautiful. I love that question. Thank you. And I believe I've understood the question well, and we'll see if my response indicates that. Um, and when you're speaking about the standard American plan of work forever for someday maybe, I was laughing in a way because there's something about it that's funny, but then also my heart kind of broke as you're speaking it. Like that's sad. Um, eh, I'm lucky in a way because 30 years ago, I named my business The Art of Vibrant Living. And my work has been one form or another of helping people live more vibrant, thriving lives. And it just absolutely does not work for me to create a life of suffering and delaying what really matters to me, to delay that until later. Like I need to be that now in order to be authentic for myself and the people I serve. So to come back around, I think to more specifically what you asked about, I'll give you a quick story that I think will answer it best. When I launched into this nomad minimalist project, I thought I was going to be doing the same things I was doing, coaching, writing, but really it was for me, it was like coaching, writing. And I was clear on, okay, I got my next book in mind. I know what I'm writing and I worked on it and I love it. And then partway through the process, perhaps largely related to the fact that other things weren't there taking my attention, I got clear that actually that's not the most important book for me right now. It's this writing here. And not only did my focus in my writing shift, that balance of coaching to writing shifted. And I've known since I was a kid, George, that my dharma, my destiny, my ikigai is primarily as an author. And I love coaching and it fits perfectly with it. Yet it was easy in the busyness of my life before to kind of delay the authorial work in some way. Like, yeah, I'll get to that later on. When I've made enough money or when I've built enough courses or whatever it is. Does that make sense?
Hmm. How do you have a process that you go through to choose the most important thing in your life right now to kind of say, this is what I should be focused on? Do you have a practice of meditation to find that answer? Do you have a practice of, intuition? Do you ask your spirit guides? Like, how do you kind of zoom in on that to get the focus to say, this is what I should be focusing on right now and not end up changing your course too soon or getting that whole entrepreneurial ADD thing where, you're seeing the grass is greener and you want to jump from, lily pad to lily pad.
Yeah, that's a beautiful, awesome question, and I could speak for 6 hours straight about that. So I'm going to give you a short version, and feel free to tell me what you would want to go deeper on. The shortest answer is yes, absolutely. I have a process on that. It's a process that I've built and been honing, and I built it first 31 years ago, and I've been honing it ever since. And the short way of describing it for me is I have a very deliberate self creation process that I engage with every day. It's the first thing that I do. Um, I refer to that self as my supreme self. It's me at my best, clearest, knowing exactly what is in front of me and most important. That's one aspect of it. So, my supreme self sacrament is the sacred practice I engage in every morning in order to remember who I really am, to create who I am and who I'm becoming. And from that being, then I don't want to say the rest is necessarily easy because everyday life brings challenges. That's the nature of it. Though I have a 10,000 times better chance of making the decisions that work best, being aligned with what is most true.
Hmm. When you first started down your minimalist path, what were some of the challenges that you experienced early on? And um, what would you do differently now than you did then?
Well, before I respond to that, you just asked me about a process, and I spoke a bunch of words, and I'm realizing they might have come out like Sanskrit or Greek or something. Did I respond to your question about process? Was that enough on that?
Yeah, I'm just gonna put it in ChatGPT later and let it explain it to me. No, I'm just kidding. No, yeah, it made total sense. Everyone has a little bit of a different, process. Of course, it's a difficult question to answer when you have things inside of your brain as far as your daily ritual or that thing that's the alignment ritual that you have, because everyone has a bit of a different alignment ritual. Like for me, my mornings are sacred. Like, I don't wanna talk to nobody, I don't wanna see nobody. No, actually, that's not the right word, proper English. I don't wanna see anybody, My mom would be upset with me from that one. So, like, I want that to be a time for me for reflection, just to be like, "You know what? I'm taking my time, I'm gonna breathe, and but I don't do a meditation or anything like that in the morning, typically. I just never could get into it. I mean, I like the idea of it, but truthfully, it just never happened. My meditation is brewing a cup of coffee, relaxing. It's more of like the Japanese way of like making tea, but I'm not like that, that controlled. Uh, but there's just a process. What I want to eat, what do I want to put inside my body? You know, relax, get ready for the day. And this goes on for like an hour or more before I do anything. And I'm not waking up at 7:30 in the morning. I'm waking up whenever I feel like it. But I don't put anything on my counter until noon or 1 o'clock, so that I've got the freedom to stay up until 4 a.m. if I want to and geek out on something, or whatever. But that works for me, and what works for different people work for different people. So to answer your question is, I I want to leave that for the audience to read into what you said to say how can they apply that
Mm.
to their life, because it was an interesting answer, and I'm going to be unpacking your answer later myself. So I thought, okay, that'd be a fun exercise to do that. But it did
Okay,
make
cool.
sense. On a spiritual level, my higher self understood it completely because I was satisfied with that answer.
I
It was a
love it.
long
I love
explanation.
it. Well, and I'm glad I asked you again about it, and you shared some of what your practice is in the morning. I call it a practice, um, because you also hit on one of the keys for everybody in the audience, which is it's your practice, right? It's going to be different for everybody. The biggest piece I get from what you said though is you do something intentionally, right? You invest time in yourself rather than waking up and reacting to everything around you. And that's the
Mhm.
main thing. And it's going to be different for everybody, and what works for everybody's different.
Yeah, I loathe the idea of having to get to a flight in the morning because I'm always jarred out of my sleep with the ding ding ding, and I have a little like alarm clock trauma on my phone. Like anytime I ever hear that on someone else's phone go off like their alarm clock, like all of a sudden I get in this anxiety, like this extreme wave of anxiety goes over me, which is the same feeling like I'm, what's going on? It's that kind of hyper vigilance all of a sudden. And then, so I probably should change my ringtone if I'm going to do that. So it's something that no one ever uses, something totally obscure. Maybe I make one in Suno or something that doesn't put me to sleep, and then go from there. But yeah, it's funny, interesting. We're talking about this, Daniel. I learned that by reading there's two books in college that I read. I read the series of Life and Teachings of the Masters of the Far East, all 6 volumes, and I was also reading Conversations with God. I read that one, the Life and Teachings, twice, and I went and bought all 3 books of Conversations with God and just read them, front to back over a week. I just couldn't stop reading; they're so good. And understanding the language and understanding the intention, both books are very different, written 100 years apart, almost, but a lot big time apart. But the intention was that you have complete control. So, starting that next day, which was the scariest day of my life in college, because I was routinely getting up late because I'm a musician, so I went to school for music, and like I would stay up super late playing with bands and doing things. That lifestyle can really grind you down. And the thought of like not using my alarm clock. I'm like, okay, if I have complete control over my body, my attention, and understanding things on a physiological level, I'm going to tell myself how many hours I'm going to sleep. It's not going to be 8 hours. It'd be like 5 or 6, exactly when I want to wake up. And I will set my alarm clock to see if I'm right.
Mm.
And what I found is every single day that day afterwards, I would wake up literally 1 to 2 minutes before my alarm clock went off. And then I just stopped setting my alarm clock at all. One thing stops that from working: alcohol.
Mm.
If I had anything to drink the night before, it doesn't work.
Mm. Mm.
I don't feel hungover or anything. It just doesn't work. I,
Mm.
I never wake up on time. I just don't, I can't hold that intention. And that's what told me that alcohol is actually screws with you more than just making you feel all right, at that time. But so anyway, I wanted to share that with you because I think that was an interesting journey for me to try to start understanding a little bit more of what I'm in control of and what I'm not in control of, you know.
Yeah. Well, I love it, and thank you for sharing that. And I love those books, and it points to the power of just, and they've been meaningful for me as well, and just points to the power. And as you're speaking, I thought of Autobiography of a Yogi, which
Yeah, that's a
was
good
one
one.
of the. It's an incredible book, and one of the things that it did for me, like those books did for you, and they did for me also, is they just opened up the possibility of like, yeah, we're so much more powerful than we realize, right? That we can program ourselves to wake up 2 minutes before the alarm or whatever time we want. Like, I didn't get that in my public school education, and the mainstream view of the world doesn't tell us that, and all kinds of other things. But yes, I'm with you.
Yeah, I love it. Um, I know I asked you a follow-up question. I'm trying to think of what it was, because we kind of
Well,
went
I
backwards a
remember
little
you
bit
asked
into
me
the question.
about, I think what it was is you asked me about what was challenging for me when I started
Oh, right.
minimalism.
Yeah, and what would you
Um,
do differently if you were starting over again today? And maybe even like how has the world changed? I mean, that might even be a factor too. Like how are things different than when you started versus, where we're at now? Or is it just you would make any changes, or how did you get into that routine or get into like a totally different thought pattern?
mm, mm. Okay, cool. Well, I'll give you two levels of response because the first time I became a minimalist was when I was, I don't know, 30, something like that, which was a ways back. And I was a completely different person then. And my orientation then was like I was traveling all around the world to be with teachers, go to universities, ashrams, like whatever was the next level of awakening for me. And it was super fun and it was amazing. And now, like a little over a year ago when I started the more recent version of this, I'm a different person. I'm not a seeker, although I'm always learning and incorrigibly curious. Though now my orientation, and coming back to part of what I said earlier, like why this has been so useful for me is it hones my focus. My focus now is on service and creating and helping people. Right? So the one of the great challenges and discoveries for me is like, okay, if I'm going to travel with one suitcase that goes underneath a plane and one carry-on bag, that's not a lot of stuff. And I have not in my say householder phase or in non-nomad phases of my life, I have not been a minimalist. I like good stuff. I love beautiful things, right? And I've walked away maybe 3 or 4 times from entire households full of beautiful things. Um, So the challenge was like just to reduce all of that, and I did it in a really short period of time. I just set a deadline. I had a flight. I'm like, this is going to happen, and that was pretty stressful. That was really challenging. Though I've seen, and I'm glad I did it though, because I've seen other people like prepare for this kind of thing, taking years to reduce their stuff. So I guess the biggest thing I would change is just telling myself back then, like, dude, it's okay. You really don't need those things. You can always get other things. Just let it go.
Hmm. I think the storage unit, the concept of a storage unit when you want to go minimalist is the wrong thing because I did that also. I put everything I owned into a storage unit and traveled for 4 years, with basically a suitcase, very similar. And I realized after 4 years of paying the storage unit bill, I could have bought all new stuff. It was the books I couldn't replace, which I could have found a home for, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
but books and drums, let me put it that way, because I've got some cool drums you can't get again, But other than that, it's like the mistakes. I mean, that's one of the mistakes, that I personally made. What are some of the mistakes that you would have changed after you started getting into this? Like, did you have false starts? Did you have situations where you lost your luggage and everything you owned was in your luggage and you're like, I should have put a tag on that luggage? I mean, what were some of the mistakes you would, or do-overs you might want to go back and fix, if you have any?
Yeah. Well, let's see. I'm sure I make mistakes every day. Thank goodness. And though nothing yet comes to mind in terms of what you're asking directly. Um, so maybe if you ask it a different way, or maybe there's something else I can share, like what I've learned along the way, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe we're going to definitely get into that because we got time, on this one. That's why I want to make sure we have plenty of time to unpack this. If
Well,
you
let me
don't
interject
mind.
for a second. Sorry, let me
Yeah.
interject because I think this will help our communication too. I don't relate to anything in my past as a mistake. That's part of like when you ask that, I'm like, my brain's going like, how do I make sense of that? I I don't make mistakes. I don't have mistakes, right? I don't orient it that way, right? Certainly every day I'm looking at what I've created and then asking myself, okay, well, what was awesome? What went well with that? And next time, what would I do differently? Like I orient that way. It's not anyway, does that make sense?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I like that. I think that would help in someone wanting to do, whether it's going minimalist or just making a big change in your life, to look at everything as not just a learning process, which we've all heard that, from Deepak Chopra to, whoever else, Donald Trump, like everything's a learning, experience or whatever. Um, but in practice, in theory, I still, even though I know it's a learning experience, sometimes I regret stuff. I'm like, you know what?
Mm.
I know that I wouldn't end up where I'm at today, and I would regret not ending up where I'm at today because I love a lot of aspects of my life, right? But you always have that wonder. You ever see those movies where people go back in time and they got to change that one thing and they turn out differently? The story usually ends the same thing, which is they go back to the way that they were before. Like they realize that where they were is actually the better place. They shouldn't, go back
Yeah.
and have wanted to do that other thing because it doesn't turn out the way they want to. But I always wonder, if we're living in the simulation or there's string theory happening at the same time, like if I was to take the other string, what would that life look like? What would everything around me look like? So I guess maybe not on the mistake side, but and even on the regret side, there's some things that I'm genuinely curious as to what would the other road have taken me to
Mm,
from time to
mm.
time. You know,
Well,
you
that's
just don't know.
great. Sorry.
No, guys,
Go
go ahead.
Well, I love what you said because you used some important words. I'm obsessed with language, right? Not just because language shows what we believe. It also, when we speak, it's creating reality. It's how we. It's the medium through which we understand and see the world, um, and create it. And the word regret is often oversimplified in a way that is not helpful to people. Right? And I remember first getting this distinction with something I read from Warner Earhart, the guy that started the EST trainings prior to Landmark Education. Brilliant, amazing dude. And he said he lives with healthy regret. I was like, healthy regret, right? And the way I interpret that, the way I speak about it is it's so good to wonder, right? To look back and go, yeah, what what, what would have happened? What why did it happen that way? Right? What can I learn from that? Yet more often when people use the word regret, and I don't know how it was for you, but more often when people use the word regret, it's a feeling of that shouldn't have happened. I should have done something different. I made a mistake. Life would have been better if it had gone this way. And that just creates pain and suffering. And it's not a resourceful way to work with or look at the past. So
Hmm.
is that what happens for you when I speak that?
Yeah, I immediately something came up in my mind. I listened not long ago to Daniel Brinkley talk about his death experience. If you ever checked out what he does, because he basically said, "Well, everyone thinks death is like walking into the light and all that stuff." He said it's completely wrong. He was dead for quite a long time before he came back. It was more than once he's died,
Mm,
which I thought was very interesting. For whatever reason, they keep sending him back here. Um, and he said that you have to live through everyone else's eyes of everyone else that you have hurt in their experience. And this all happens in a very short window of time, of course. Like you could have years or decades worth of that experience in fractions of a second when you die or whatever the scenario is going to be. But yeah, he said that was his biggest eye opening. And when I thought about what he said, I'm like, what you're saying as far as the regret, like would I regret the way I treated somebody if I had to relive that situation through someone else's eyes, not knowing the pain that they had, what else was going on in their life, like even just cutting someone off at a traffic light or yelling obscenities at somebody who cut you off, little things like that. It's like you don't know what someone else is going through, and a bad day can quickly exponentially turn into your last day, on this earth, if you, or at least your last day for this life, however you look at it. Uh, if you're not careful with things, because things happen all the time. And those are some other things that, regret sets in, like again, taking those other paths, you know, de-escalating situations before they escalate, or maybe not escalating quick enough. That's another one. People always talk about de-escalating a situation. Maybe, and there's some situations where you maybe want to escalate quicker, but you need to do it with full control. I'm not saying the pacifist way. I know, and I'd like to talk to you more about some of that as well in a little bit. But sometimes being petrified at taking any action is wrong. You need to be present in the moment, and be able to be intentional. At least that's some of my thoughts. And I'm just in those scenarios where regret happened for me. I wasn't present in the moment. I was reactive,
Mm,
right? That's what created the regret later on
mm.
because I wasn't in control, because I wasn't as present as I should have been.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. I'm with you. It's and that's an important distinction you're making about de-escalation or escalation, because sometimes the most loving thing isn't the kind is sorry, the most loving thing isn't being nice, right? It's being forceful. It's being truthful, and that can take a situation and escalate it. And sometimes that's the most loving, powerful thing we can do for somebody else, for ourselves as well. Yeah.
Hmm. I mean, I think holding things back for too long also can create challenges. Like we all hear of the pastor's daughter. Like as soon as she gets out of the house, pregnant, 30 days, or whatever the scenario is, right? But by suppressing all of these things and not really dealing with them and just kind of pushing them off the table, whatever the scenario is, that's just one example. Um, I mean, there's gateways to destructive behavior. And there's so many gateways. It's almost like an entire building full of doors. And you could take any door at any given time, and they're all gateways. You don't know what's on the other side. You have to choose those doors wisely. And hopefully you have a guide or a sage or someone who can walk you through it. To say like, watch out for the red doors. Only take the light colored doors or the dark colored doors or whatever they might be. But we weren't given a manual when we came into this life. Unfortunately, there was no like the handbook for the new, recently deceased. I always loved that thing in Beetlejuice. I wish they had that. Like you can just go grab that off the stand. And say like the handbook for living, a peaceful and fulfilling life. Like if someone wants to write that book and have it divinely channeled, I would challenge anyone who has that connection. Go do that. I want to read it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that'd be kind of fun.
Well, and I'll jump back for a second, George. What you said about I don't recognize that guy's name, but the guy who died that you spoke about.
Daniel Brinkley, I think his name was.
Okay, cool. Well, I love what you shared about that. That one, he said it's not what everybody says, and my thought on that is like I think everybody's got a different experience. So cool. In his experience, though, like I could just feel the power of that, the power of feeling, becoming aware of all the pain that we have caused, right? It's that's so powerful and so beautiful. And you you mentioned the pastor's daughter example, and as you're speaking about that part before, I had flashed on another word that I feel like is very often misunderstood, especially in church worlds, is the word repent, right? And so often the way I've heard it put is repent is you did something wrong and fix yourself, fix it, feel badly about it. And what I see as repent and what I get from what Daniel was saying there is when we become aware of injury that we are causing, right? And become aware, not hear, feel it, because that's what you described. See, in seeing the world through those eyes, the way I heard it anyway, is like not just intellectual, it's actually feel that. When we become aware like that, then we change, right? Because we know, part of us knows that if I've injured others, I've injured myself. So repent to me is about learning from the past so that we can do better, more in alignment with life and love and spirit.
Hmm.
And I've nearly died 5 times myself, so I'm always curious about the portals. Put it that way.
Did you get a little tattoo like they do in prison when you're on the wall, like one more year down? You do that every time you die.
That might be my next tattoo. Thank you.
Because you walk through the gym, people are like, "Was that the amount of people this guy's killed?" Or like, "What is that?" Right? Because that would create some curiosity. That'd be kind of a fun tattoo to have.
That's a good hook. I like it.
Um,
What you counting, man?
you said something a little earlier, and I started to bring that up, and then I reversed course.
Mm,
The and hopefully you feel comfortable enough to share this with me. You said you've left full houses worth of stuff before,
mm.
just completely like walked away. I'm curious if you don't mind sharing, like what were those situations? Like what happened there?
Okay. Yeah. Um, I mean, other than the SWAT teams being like close to coming out, no, just kidding. Um, what happened in those situations? Well, the simple version that applies to all of it is I value freedom very highly. So sometimes it's come to a decision of, right, what's more important to me? All this stuff, my emotional attachment to the stuff, or the money I could get by selling it, or being free now, right? And it's happened several times where it's like things shifted inside me, inside the world, and I got clear like my path is here. It's no longer here. And so once I get that kind of clarity, the sooner I start down that path, the better. And so the more I can be expedient in releasing that stuff, and I don't mean like leaving it for other people to deal with, or like, and my own mother became a hoarder in the last part of her life. And so I got a firsthand look at what that's like, and bless my sister, because she basically dealt with that whole thing. So I'm not talking about dealing, I'm not talking about leaving for other people to take care of, but just letting it go in order to be with what's real now. That was that may be more theoretical. Is that what you're looking for, or what would be useful?
I mean, what was the trigger? What was the catalyst? Meaning, like, I've done something similar. I'll share this, maybe to open the conversation. I had a really, really bad marriage for 15 years. Terrible.
Yeah.
Wanted to leave, was told to leave, was told to stay. And it was just like consistently messing with my head,
Mm,
consistently messing with my head until I realized that I was never going to get out, unless I waited for that catalyst to push once
mm,
more. I always said the next time, the next time, the next time. And that went on for a decade
mm,
of the next times until the next time was the last time. And
mm,
I kept thinking through that, did I do the right thing? Did I do the right thing? And I kept getting confirmations that I did just by my interaction with this other person.
mm,
And, you know, it was difficult to leave everything that you've built for 20 plus years, in your life, everything you've ever saved, scrapped, scratched for, walk away from it. Like I took two things with me. I took my drums. As you can see, there's a theme there, drums, very valuable. So I took that with me, and I took a suitcase full of clothes. And I think for me, it was the hard thing that I had to do, which strengthened my resolve. I literally walked to my storage unit
mm,
in the hot summer Florida sun. I literally walked, and it was not close. And I had to go get my luggage that was in my storage unit that didn't have anything, because I already moved everything into the house and been living there for a while. Like, this was after my 4 year, on the road stint. Um, every step that I took, every sweat, that dripped onto the sidewalk, strengthened my resolve to not go back to
mm,
that,
mm,
right? Because I had to put myself through some pain. And maybe this is valuable to somebody who's listening. Maybe this helps reframe that question a little bit.
mm,
Every step that I went, was a painful step on the way back, and it made it easier for me to stick to the intention of what I've been telling myself for a decade that had to happen, that never happened. Because what I was taught was you don't, you're in it for life, until death do us apart. I didn't realize I always thought that people who went through divorce were weak, or maybe they just rushed into something a little too early, or for one reason or another, it was not going to happen to me. I always said I'm never going to let that happen to me, and it eventually happened to me. You know what I mean? Whether I manifested it, I don't know or not, but it was one of those things that. So when I walked away from that, and I still think about that every day, but like you, I value my freedom, and I realize now that was the price that I had to pay in order to make it all okay. You know what I mean? For the other person, as well as for myself, because they don't ever need to worry about wanting for anything ever
Mm.
again, but I had to feel good about that. I couldn't leave someone else in a worse position, you know, because I want to do something for myself that was maybe feeling a little more, what do you say? There's a word for that. Just, I didn't want to be selfish, in that scenario. And that's, I think, what kept me the longest. It kept me stuck, kept me trapped, is feeling like if I walked out of the situation, I would be selfish. Just not ready yet, not enough time, not whatever the scenario was, just wasn't until I finally had everything together, and then it felt better. So getting back to that original question of walking away, I don't know if you don't mind sharing the circumstances, because some people go through the divorce, some people go through maybe their house burned down. They literally didn't have anything left. Maybe they got foreclosure happen on their house. They lost everything because they couldn't pay. They lost their job, or I know people who went to jail for a short window of time. No one could bail them out. 6 months. They lost everything because their renter, the person they were renting from, literally put everything in storage and then sold it all. It's gone. You know what I mean? And they baby pictures, stuff that you couldn't get back. So I'm wondering for you, what were those situations? You said that happened multiple times. I mean, what were those situations, and what was there a theme that kept coming up, and why you had to kind of repeat that?
Mm. Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that, and I love the image of you physicalizing the emotional journey through that hot walk, right? That's a great snapshot of what a ritual is, and yeah, I can imagine that was incredibly challenging, and I love your desire not to be hurtful to someone else in the midst of that, right? Shakespeare said, "Breaking up is hard to do," right? And it's not just because of the programming, though I heard you on that. We have a lot of programming around good people don't get divorced. I mean, it's much more common now, but we still have that programming, and sometimes we don't know how much programming is in us until we bump up against it, right? So, in my experience, I've had um, a divorce was one scenario with it. Um, Another was a connection with a spiritual teacher that was so powerful that I knew what was best for me, and I have the belief that what is best for me is also best for the world. Right? Was to move. I was in California, was to move to Australia to be with that teacher, and it meant letting go of a house that I co-owned and stuff and all of that. Though the most recent one, I'll speak in more detail about, and you're welcome to ask me anything. I'll respond as best I can, honestly, to everything. Um, is when my daughter and I left Bali. Where are we now? 2026. So just about 10 years ago, we didn't have a literal house fire, though shortly after the event I'm going to tell you about occurred, I learned an expression from Chinese medicine, which is that a house fire where nobody is injured is a blessing, which is like immediately I will buffer that by saying, hey, if somebody has just had a house fire, that's not cool what I just said, right? And I was on Maui a couple of years ago when we had some big fires, and a lot of people I know and a lot of people in our community lost everything due to house fire. And it did not feel like a blessing by any means. And for a lot of people, it still doesn't feel like a blessing. Right? What happened for us, though, my daughter and I, we were on a trip. We were in North America, And so literally we were 2 suitcases traveling. She was 9 at the time, and some weird events unfolded, which made it clear it's not safe for us to go back to Bali. And we had a big household of beautiful stuff. For my daughter, the hardest, worst thing was our dog. Um, that was up pretty high up there for me too. So we had a dog there. Um, and I had a stack of journals from my mother, right? She was also a writer and an author that I wanted to work with. That was like the only really irreplaceable thing that I had. And, so suddenly my daughter and I are in North America with 2 suitcases, and we, quote, and I'll come back to the quote, lost everything, like our home, all our belongings, our country of residence, my business, my income, my reputation. And suddenly we're like, for me, it was the first time living in North America in decades. For my daughter, it was like the first time ever living in North America. So it was really mind blowing and challenging, because at that point I identified it as I lost, right? And I knew that I was unbreakable in that time. Like I knew I would get through this, and I worked really hard through my own spiritual practices to take what I knew in my head and feel it and live it in my body. Like I knew in my head, this is for a good reason. This is for our benefit. Much good will come from this. My body and mind at that time and heart, though, was like, this is horrible. This is awful. I don't like this. So the way I say lost is because as I've grown more anti-fragile, even beyond resilient, beyond unbreakable, is I've come to realize I gave all that stuff away. I didn't know that at the time. It took me quite some learning to realize it. But yeah, I gave it all away in service of something higher, right? Because I cared about something more, which is my daughter's safety, my safety, the safety of the teachers and students who were scheduled to come and be with me for my next event there. Wouldn't have been safe for any of us had we stayed. So because I felt that higher value, I gave all that stuff away. Now that was a mouthful, so I will zip it for a moment and see what's happening inside George Shepard now.
You mentioned a term, anti-fragile, which is something you and I discussed a week ago or so when we first started talking about, getting together and having you, come on to the show. Could you unpack anti-fragile and how that applies to I think it's the Japanese akagi? Is that right?
Oh,
Akagi?
yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love to share with people about this because like so love what you're doing with this show. Unbreakable is so important and valuable for all of us to know that if we live more than a minute outside of a vacuum, we're going to encounter challenges. We're going to, life, part of this earth world is getting slapped around some and learning and growing from it. So nobody gets out unscathed. And so if we can learn, as you're helping so many people learn through this podcast, that, you know what, those hard things don't need to break me. Like I can get stronger and more resilient, and I can withstand these things, and I'm going to be better for it. Anti-fragile takes it to the next level, which says those things make me better, more confident. Not just I don't break, I actually reform at a higher order. And the Japanese example for it that I love from Japanese philosophy and art practice is called kintsugi, Kintsugi. which is, you know, a transliteration anyway. So it's a characters. I don't know Japanese language that well, so I can't speak to that part. Um, the practice is this: in the Western world, we're much more accustomed to. Okay, actually, I've got pottery right here, right? So a piece of pottery, if it breaks, well, we sweep it up and throw it away. Right? In Japanese culture, there's a practice that if something's sacred and beautiful, especially a unique handmade craft, which is very much like what we are, unique, right? Custom made. If it breaks, well, we don't throw it away, we glue it back together. And it's better after it's glued back together than it was before. Why? Why would that be? Well, because before it was like perfect, untested. And when it's broken, it gets character. It gets a new life. It's been through an experience. It's learned something. Like I learned, you described earlier, regret coming from moments where you weren't really present, right? And so your review of those things now leads you to, like, I'm more present, right? When I'm in the midst of this kind of thing, I'm more there because I learned from the pain from that, right? So in the same way, the new thing, the glued thing is better, but not only that, the practice is they take gold and mix it in with the glue. Right? So literally gold within the glue. So the new version will have a crack in it, and it will also have a little bit of gold fleck visible in that crack. And I love that because that's if we see the world that way, we can take all the pains, all the challenges we've had, the traumas, and not only keep going unbreakable, we get better, we get more beautiful, we get more valuable, right? And that's part of what the gold teaches us. Like you're so much more valuable as a man, as a partner, right? As a businessman, because of some of those moments when you weren't present. That's part of why you're who you are now.
How would someone go about infusing gold into their cracks? Like if you can come up with a, you might have a better way of thinking about this, but I'm curious how you would consider, or if someone said, well, I don't have anything of value. Let's say gold is of value. It's the metaphor, right, for the value. How would they infuse gold into their imperfections as they heal those imperfections to make themselves stronger and more valuable?
Mm, that's a beautiful question. Thank you. Okay. Well, let's touch for a moment on the obvious connection here, which is alchemy, right? Alchemy, we think of this old medieval practice of taking base metals, lead, and using this, you know, sacred process and mysterious elixir and blah blah blah, and then turning it into gold, right? Which may be real, true, I don't know. What I do know though is it's a beautiful metaphor for what is possible for us, right? So how does anybody take the pain, the trauma, the difficulty, the cracks that we all have and create that into gold, into something that's more valuable? Well, one, it starts with knowing that that's possible, which is part of why we're talking about this. Two is asking some radical questions that are not the ones that we usually get. The question being like, how am I more valuable because of that? What did I learn from that? Like I remember, I'll give you an example. I was working with one of my coaches back before I realized I gave it all away, when I was still in the pain of it. And part of the pain for me was like I went from my daughter's first 10 years living this really extraordinary life in Bali, where we had you know, great people working with us that helped us. We built a beautiful center. We lived in these pretty luxurious homes, and we always had everything we wanted. We flew around the world. We did everything that we wanted. And then suddenly we're living in like my friend's little tiny studio apartment. And we went from having our own private chef to this is going to sound just stupidly obnoxious to some people. So I apologize. Please don't judge me. pray for me instead. And that is, we had to buy our own food, sweep the floor, make the food, take the trash out. And I didn't grow up with a silver spoon in my hand, so that stuff wasn't hard for me to do. But my daughter had never experienced that before, right? And suddenly we had a period for 6 months where we were in LA, and she was having a hard time adjusting with the school. And she said to me, and this just broke my heart, she said, "It's the first time in my life I've experienced people not being nice." She was experiencing meanness and bullying. And so I was speaking with my coach about, like, I created this suffering for her. So I was in the pain of it. And the simple question was, do you see ways that this is useful or beneficial for her? What ways do you see? Questions are so powerful because they immediately reorient the mind to what else is possible? How else can I look at this? Right? And that is alchemy. Just training our minds to not see mistakes and problems, training our mind to say, okay, here are situations that happen. What can I learn? How can I change? And then we automatically become more valuable.
Sometimes I wonder if, like my brother and other people that I know, friends of mine, who maybe have struggled in their life early on, they say, I never want my kids to struggle like I had to. I'm going to give them a better life. I never had this person attend any of my sports games, or I was never allowed to play sports, or whatever the scenario was going to be. So I'm going to make sure that my kids don't grow up knowing that. And they almost force that stuff on them. Now, granted, I think that there's a lot of kids who sit around and do nothing a little bit too much these days, right? And of course, I'm sure that our grandparents said the same thing about us, our generation. These kids don't do it. What's wrong with these kids? They don't want to do anything. But I just wonder about that. If we're, like you said, if we're depriving them of one of the greatest gifts we can give them, which is struggle, or to be allowed to make mistakes. I mean, mistakes that literally could cost them their life, and that's, as a parent, we wouldn't want to do that, right? Like, I had some people in my high school class, graduating class, who stupid would go out, knocking mailboxes off with baseball bats from time to time. Well, one of them stuck their head out the window when they did that and knocked his head completely off his body.
Okay.
Little things like that, or they rode in the back of a truck and went around a corner a little bit too fast, the driver did, and they flew out of the truck and died. They were just in the back. No one had there's no seatbelts in the back. Like, that's not something, but not allowing kids or people to make mistakes, I think that also weakens them. So getting back to, the conversation about making the cracks more valuable, making the experience more valuable, maybe being present after you realize that there's a crack, there. If you want to sow gold into the crack, what are you taking away from this? How do you make it more valuable? I mean, I think that might be an interesting practice to figure out, like, how do you put the gold in the cracks, and then also but you have to let yourself and let your kids or let other people have a problem, yeah, have a crack. If they don't ever have a crack, like, how can they ever become stronger? I see that as a big problem right now, like in the government, truthfully. Not to get on a totally different topic, but there's so much government overreach and so many restrictions and rules. It feels like we're being legislated into a prison. Like, you can't do this, you can't do that. Like, they don't tell us what we can do, they tell us what we can't. And there's always some repercussion for it, and it scares the crap out of people. So they don't ever do anything. They just become automatons, right? And they don't think. They're programmed, and I don't know if that's a government control situation more than it is a like, we want to take care of our children, because they shouldn't be, overreaching like that. But it's the same thing. Like, if we're a product of that environment, then of course we're going to perpetuate that on to the next generation, to the next generation, to the next generation until we go extinct.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just a thought.
Oh, I'm with you. You said a lot of important and powerful and beautiful things in there. And two pieces that jump out at me. I remember watching a TED talk decades ago. I think it was Sir Ken Robinson, if I'm remembering right. And the title was something like this: Why Kids Should Play with Sharp Knives. Something like that. Right? And it was a great title, controversial, because as parents, we have this impulse to protect our children, right? I don't want them to have the same mistakes as I did, right? And then I won't go into it, but there's how the Buddha was created was a perfect example of that. We have to experience suffering, and the truth is, we're going to. The only question really is which mistakes, right? So for me as a parent, I want to help my daughter to have the struggles and challenges that serve her best. And I would rather it not be waking up in a hospital with all of her bones broken, right? I'd rather she get her lessons in other ways. What I think is great, though, to tie a couple pieces together here, though, is when we know that, like what you wisely pointed out, kids need to make mistakes, if we use that term, right? Make mistakes, have problems, struggles. And what's even more important, and this is a really cool thing, research shows that when parents and children argue, or when the parent loses it or yells at the kid or something like that, what's more important is not avoiding that or stopping that from happening. It's the repair that happens afterwards, right? Where the parent can come to the child and say, you know what, I lost my cool. I was triggered about this thing. That wasn't appropriate. I don't like the way I treated you. I will change and do better with it. I'm sorry. Right? Some version of that. That act is more important than the yelling or the losing it. Right? And that repairing is very much like putting the gold in the cracks. And part of, if we live this way ourselves, we automatically show our children that. And we can all learn that we can make decisions and have troubles and fall over and play with sharp knives and get cut. That's part of life. What's even more important is learning from that, repairing, and creating the next thing.
Did you discover that your mom was going down that hoarding road before you became a minimalist, or was that something afterwards?
Yeah, thanks for coming back to that. Whew. Um, in my 20s and 30s, when I was a minimalist, well, actually, that was the bridge. It's fascinating because I was a minimalist, world traveler, no home base when my mother died. Right? And this was like 2004. I know specifically because that's part of a memoir I'm writing right now. So in 2004 was right when I was moving to Australia, actually, to be with that teacher I mentioned earlier. And I saw my mother before I went. Like one of my last things to do in the States before I go, I went and visited her at her house in New Hampshire. And I hadn't seen her for a few years, maybe a couple of years, or I hadn't seen her in her home, something like that. And when we walked through her home, I was astounded, George. Like what the way it had shifted her hoarding. Um, like literally, I walked into the downstairs was bad, but she wanted me to help her with something in the bathroom off her bedroom. And so she's like, "Yeah, come on up here." And you know, I walk into the bedroom, and it was like stacks of stuff everywhere. There was a path, like a single file path leading to the bathroom. Not only that, her bed, which was a pretty big bed, a queen size bed, was stacked 3/4 of it with stuff, and there was like 1/4 of it, which is where she slept. And I was just astounded. Like I couldn't even process it. I was heartbroken and confused. And I wanted to help her. And I also knew I need to go. This is what I'm doing. And she died, I don't know, maybe 6 months later. Um, and 6 months after that is when I put down roots for the first time in my adult life. That's when I moved to Bali, and I was there for 13 years. Prior to that, I had never been any place for a year. So it was a really strange confluence of events because I saw her hoarding while I was a minimalist. And then shortly after that, I put down roots and began accumulating. And there's nothing wrong with accumulating. Like it can be great and beautiful stuff is awesome. The challenge is who owns who, right? Do I own this stuff or does this stuff own me? And it's a slippery slope, especially because we have so much conditioning around us. Buy more, own more, get more, right? Measure our quality by how much stuff and how expensive it is. So it's a slippery slope to say, oh, I really love this thing. Oh, well, if I love that thing, I would probably love this thing. Let me get 10 of those. Let me get 50 of those. So I'm not sure if I really responded directly to your question. Though I can say this for certain, seeing my mother's hoarding, and not just the hoarding, it was like the impact on the quality of her life, that made an impression on me for sure.
Did it give you instant anxiety walking through that space when you said, "I need to leave," or was it more of overwhelming sadness, or, like, what was the emotion you felt during that time?
Oh, dude, it was all those things. Yeah. I mean, just being in that space. And I'm so sensitive to it now. Like, part of what I do in my current life is I steward other people's homes, high value properties while the owners are away. Right. So I might be in a house for 2 months or 3 months or something like that. And I've learned, so this goes back to one of your earlier questions, like what's a learning for me in the process. I've learned that I will not accept a gig if it's in a house that's very cluttered. Like, because I feel it. Like, I feel anxiety. So yeah, when I was in my mother's house back in 2004, as soon as I got in there, it was like, oh, it felt horrible. Much more strong though was the sadness of that's what her life had come to, right? And of course, for me there was this instant knowing on a physical, emotional level that her lifestyle and all that stuff was symptomatic of what was going on inside her. And that's one of the amazing things about the relationship between physical body, emotional body, and the external environment is the external environment on some level always mirrors what's going on the inside.
What do you think caused that hoarding? What was the gateway for her? Did she go through something traumatic? Was it the fear of loss in certain other areas? Like, what do you think kind of pivoted in her life to make that something? Because from what I understand from a lot of hoarders is it's a shift. It's like one day they were not like that. They weren't like that all their life, but then all of a sudden they start accumulating, like you said, and they never stop. And one thing leads to another, which leads to another. I can use that. I can use that someday. I can use that because I hear them talk about it when they try to clean their houses out. Like, I was going to use that. It's like you were going to use those papers from 1975, or whatever. Like, oh, yeah, I can use that to start a fire. It's like, then you would have in the next 25 years. So I mean, it's interesting, like the reasoning that I hear, the justification for some of these, because it's it's painful to watch sometimes, because you can see the emotion. But in your mom's situation, was there something that you know of that happened that you don't mind sharing, and or a situation that you can always push it to somebody else so you don't share something that maybe she wouldn't want you to share, that someone else may have had happened in their life that you can draw a conclusion or draw a similarity to.
I thank you. Yes, I can speak about it directly. And I'll tie in another piece from earlier. One of my self-creation practices, specifically in my writing work, I speak out loud. I write what God gives me. I serve with story, breath, and broken beauty. I listen, I remember, I convey what burns true. All else falls away. Right? So part of my commitment in writing and also speaking in living is to tell the deepest possible truth. Right. And as I'm moving into the genre of memoir, part of what I'm also learning is one, truth is subjective, right? I'll share some things with you, and other people that might be involved would be like, that's not how I remember it. That's not what happened. That's okay, because we all do that, right? And I also only will speak about something when I feel genuine love in me for all parties involved, right? If I'm in a place of judging someone about it or have an impulse to put somebody down, then I know I've got more work to do, and it's not time to speak about it. So, two things pop to mind immediately, though, related to my mother and your question. One, we came from New England, right? And New England has a particular energy, call it puritanical, is one of the factors there. When settlers came from Europe to New England, life was really hard, right? And there's this famous joke that people in New England save so much that they will have in the attic a box that's labeled pieces of string too small to use for anything. Right? That's how far like the mind shift can go. So that was like boiled into us as kids. And when my mother was, I think she was like 4 or 5, I don't know the exact dates, there was a big event happened in her family. And that was that her parents owned a floral shop. And apparently they had gotten to the place of doing pretty well. Right? They were succeeding so well in their business that, as the story goes, I wasn't there for this, my grandfather, kind of just on a lark, got an itch, and he went out and bought them a brand new Cadillac. Brand new Cadillac, which at that time was like the height of luxury, right? That was the thing. And paid cash for it. And when he talked with the car salesman about insurance, he's like, well, I'll come back for that. All right. My grandmother wasn't happy with this. The day after he bought the car, he totaled it. Completely totaled it. Right? And whatever amount of money it was a big deal. And that was like the impetus for ending my mother's parents' relationship. And so my mother, as like a 4 or 5-year-old girl, she learned scarcity and insurance. Right? So part of her programming was like, there's not enough, right? Money causes friction, divorce, and like, better have something in reserve because if we lose it all, we're in big trouble. So that was part of the psyche that was built into her as a little kid. And most of us grow up not learning to question the stories, the beliefs. We don't even realize we have them. That's just the way things are. So my sense of what you said, and I never thought about this way, so I love that we're talking about this, why there is a switch for people. Like they go through their whole lives, with a relatively normal relationship with stuff. And then something happens at a certain point, usually I don't know, I was going to say usually after some decades of life, but I don't know if that's true. But if something happens at a certain point, the flip switches and they just start holding on to stuff. Like in a way that others will look at them and go like, do you really need 8,000 rolls of toilet paper here? Or whatever it is.
Have you been through the pandemic? That's money, man.
Yeah, right. That's printing money. Yeah. So I think it's like the energy is always in them, and yet they're able to sort of maintain it. Like I have this impulse to hold on, but that's just weird. I don't really need that stuff. But then something happens, and the level of control or the repression of or something is just not strong enough anymore, and that fear-based energy comes to the surface and it overtakes them in some way.
Hmm. I have to ask a question now that's been burning in my head.
All right.
When you're writing a memoir, is the minimalist memoir going to be 400 pages, but you only write on one of them? 399 blank pages and only one, and it's a haiku. Would that be
I love it. I love it. Well,
you could
and
probably put that in the bookstore and it would sell. People would be like, "This is pretty cool. I'm gonna put this on my bookshelf."
somebody challenged Ernest Hemingway to, I forget the exact story, but it was something like, what's the shortest short story you can write? And his response was, for sale, baby shoes, never worn.
That's powerful.
Right.
I
And
mean, I
so
could see it. That's a movie too. It's not
it,
just
like,
yeah.
and that's why he's such a master. He was such a master of the writing craft. Here's a radical, weird thing, though, George. One thing I definitely didn't expect as I moved into this season of soaring was that the lifestyle would have such a profound effect on my work. So I write much more minimally than I used to. When I speak with clients, I say way less than I used to. So there is an interesting relationship here. In fact, my writing has become a bit more prose poetry. My last book was straight prose, right? Just straight regular sentences. And now the writing is like every pass I do through the work is looking for, can I reduce this? Can I say this in less words?
Yeah. The younger generation says, say less, say less. I thought that was
Yeah.
so awesome when I heard someone say that from stage. I'm like, what does that mean? And then all of a sudden I'm like, wait a minute, I just got it. So, uh, interesting. You said that the lifestyle is actually taking a profound effect on your work. Can you maybe go a little bit deeper into that? As far as what I'm hearing is that what you do produce, you try to add more value to the thing that you do produce or the thing that you do. And I could think I could probably bleed over into more than just your writing, right? Probably into everything. But I'm curious, like how do you value how do you add value to that?
First thing that comes to me in response to that is I have a computer application I use to keep track of my to-do list, right? Or to-do lists, more accurately, right? Because I have all these different categories and lists, and anybody that's productive has their version of this kind of thing. And a year and a half ago, when I was living in our big home on Maui, and my daughter was in high school, and I was doing my normal work life, my to-do list is almost embarrassing to admit this. My daily to-do list was seldom below 100 items. Now, as you know, that did not mean that I was doing all those things every day. Right? It did mean, though, that in my head, I was confused enough to think, all these things I need to do today, I can't take them off my list. And as I speak about it now, I'm like, dude, you were just out of your mind crazy then, speaking to me a year and a half ago. As this lifestyle has evolved, my to-do list is small, right? So each day, it's simplified to self-creation. That's phase one. We spoke about it a little bit earlier. Phase two creation for others, which is usually writing, though sometimes it's preparing a broadcast or sometimes it's business development. Right? It's creating in a way that's going to be directly of service to others. And then phase 3 is creation in collaboration with others. So what we're doing right now is in that third category. So every day I have essentially 3 things to do. The form will change. But yeah, doing less more effectively creates more value. There's no doubt about it.
Hmm. You talked about house surfing, which I find very interesting. I had another person recently that I met a couple of years back who said that they're doing something similar about a year ago. That they let go of some of the things. I think that their daughter going away to college was one of the things. So that's very similar. Some similar like prompting in their life to make some changes, and I thought that was the coolest thing
Mm.
for someone to do. So I'm curious. Could you explain that? Because I think that there's a real opportunity there for people. Of course, you don't want to have someone house sit who maybe would throw a wild party and put that on the internet in your house, or would sell all your belongings and move to Jamaica. Not that they all move to Jamaica, but it is a pretty cool place sometimes to go. Um, but I'm curious, like, how did you get into that? And like, tell us a bit about that kind of an underground industry.
Yeah, it's great. And as you speak about it, I smile because I've heard some stories that are entertaining, we'll say at the least. Not necessarily were they entertaining for the people involved in that moment, though later on they became entertaining. And firstly, shout out to my former client and friend Leanne, because it was really her just planting a seed in me as to this lifestyle. So going back to, I'm not going to be an empty nester. I'm going into a season of soaring. I didn't have all the information at that point, how this was going to work out. I just had the instructions: let go of all your stuff. Don't have a fixed home. Okay. And then came the question like, well, how's that going to work? Like, where am I going to live? And I like living in really beautiful places. I like homes and properties that they don't have to necessarily be luxurious, though high quality in beautiful places.
Right.
So living that way in a normal way, owning a house or long-term lease, that's costly, though from my perspective, doable. Living that way without the commitment to a lease or mortgage, is much more expensive, challenging, right? To rent estates for a short-term basis, not only like is it a lot of money, it's like that grates against my sense of values, like paying $10,000 a day. I don't know, in my current relationship to money, that doesn't feel like something savory to me. So I'm sitting there thinking, like, how's this going to work? And I took a sublet on Martha's Vineyard for a few months, and then I came back to Maui where had been living. I was like, well, what's this next phase going to look like? I was taking care of a friend's farm for a couple months, and then Leanne said to me, you could be a house sitter. I'm like, a house sitter? Like, I didn't even really grok what that meant. She's like, yeah, it's like a whole industry, really. And so she started teaching me about how it could work and what it could do. And I was like, huh, well, I'm a really good steward. Like, I know how to take care of people, animals, homes, energy. Like, I've developed that skill really well. And turns out that's a valuable skill, right? That's something that's really important to a lot of people. So I just started experimenting with it, and somebody offered me a gig. At first, I did it just as an exchange. Like, I'll come and take care of your cats while you're away and make sure the plants are watered. And 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 I could stay in your house and use the car or whatever. I was like, this is kind of cool. Like, I was in a beautiful place. The cats were nice. We had a good time together. I wasn't alone. I was in a season of solitude, though not alone. And because I was in somebody else's house, I mean, there were things to do. There's always stuff to do. Sweep the floor, make the food, open the curtains, whatever it is. That's going to be wherever I am. There's going to be that kind of stuff to do. And yet, being in someone else's space provided a sense of novelty. Like, or sometimes I'm in places that I've never been to before. Like, oh, how do I get around? How does this car work? I've never driven one of these before, right? That kind of stuff is fascinating and stimulating. So I'm learning neuroplasticity all the time. Plus, being in somebody else's home rather than my old home, I'm out of my normal groove and I have less distractions. So my focus on my work is deeper and more consistent, or it has a different quality to it. I'll put it that way. So yeah, it's been a really interesting component. When I started doing it, my friend said, well, the key is to be reliable, duh, but common sense isn't that common, and also to have good reviews. So I started getting some references and referrals from clients and family and students and friends, and pretty soon I had like this huge list of reviews and references. So when somebody would find out about me, they're like, who are you? Like, people seem to think you're trustworthy, or people have all these things to say about you. I'm like, well, I'm honored. I asked them if they would like to speak on my behalf, and they said yes. And so, like, from what she taught me, be reliable and have some character witnesses, essentially, I'm in demand for that, right? Because trust is important. Did that get to what you were asking? I have a feeling I went off on a couple different side roads.
No, it was good. I'm just thinking like, do you go on the street and spin a sign, be like, house sitter for sale, or
House
like
sitter
we'll sell
available.
my soul. We'll work for house sitting. We'll work for bedding. you know, cat sitting. Like, how do you get the word out? Like, how did you actually get started with that?
Well, when I started, I joined a platform called Trusted House Sitters. Right. They built a huge business out of vetting house sitters and what they call pet parents. And it was really, like, I learned a lot and I met a lot of cool people through that. There are other similar things. There's one that's specifically for animals called Rover. I never joined that one. It doesn't fit for me. At this point, it's all word of mouth, right? It's knowing people that know me. And so, I plan out a certain distance in advance. Like, this is how far I'm willing to commit. And then, if I want to get something further planned, maybe I'll reach out to friends, business colleagues, whatever, and say, hey, in case you know somebody that would like this, I'm available.
Hmm. How do you identify? I mean, do you have, I'm not asking your pronouns. What I'm, what I'm asking is, do you have a business card that says professional house sitter? Let people identify with their occupation. Like, I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, I'm a drummer, I'm a whatever, right? So how do you identify with that? Or not? It's just how I get around.
How deep do you want to go on that?
How deep
The
do you want to go?
All right, I'll tie a couple pieces together. At the beginning of our conversation, when you asked me about what do I do in the morning, right? And I described it as self-creation practice. Right? Self is another word for identity. Right? So every day I create myself anew, right? And the biggest, most central components of who I am is not what I do, right? What I do is the fruit of the root and the tree, right? The root is my identity, right? So who I am as a sovereign being, as a creator, takes many forms. Author, coach, I like to say steward of private sanctuaries. Although if I say that in normal conversation, people go like, "What are you talking about, man?" Um, so that's why in certain situations I will let people know, yeah, I live in and take care of high value properties while the owners are away. So that's the short version of it. Um, Again, though, I don't really care. You can call me a house sitter, you can call me a steward, you can call me Francine. It doesn't matter. I know who I am, and I know what I'm bringing to situations.
Hmm. What was some of the worst situations you ever found yourself in, if you don't mind me asking? Like, if you've gotten into any like really sketchy spots doing this, where you like walked into someone's house, you're like, I made a bit of a mistake here, or this is gonna present a interesting challenge. Yeah, I'm curious.
I've had some of that, and mind you, this is first world problems kind of conversation. Um, the first one that came to mind when you spoke that is I was taking care of a beautiful home in, where was that? Bend, Oregon. A gorgeous view, high ceilings, like just a beautiful custom made home. And there were two dogs there. And I love dogs. Like I'm an amateur dog trainer, so I've always had my own dogs, um, except for when I've been a nomad. And so like that's a cool part of that for me. That was a cool part of that gig. Um, and I had never spent much time around a breed of dog known as a corgi, right? And super cool dog, really friendly and sweet. However, we encountered a challenge, he and I, Otis is his name, because he is used to sleeping on the bed. And a lot of people, bless their hearts, they love to sleep with their animals. For me, sleeping in the same bed with a dog is like, no, that's not how I roll. Right? We could talk about why and all of that. Um, so when I go into someone's home, for the most part, I want to honor everything that they are doing and the way they like things to be kept and all of that. Right? Um, if they're open to it, I might bring some things that could make things even better for their place, and sometimes that happens. So my first night there, I had traveled and I was kind of exhausted and tired and got everything set up and man, so ready to go to bed. We're good with the relationship with the dogs and everything's all sorted. So I go to get in bed, and as soon as I get in bed, Otis right in the bed. I was like, my brother, I'm sorry, but it's not going to work for us to sleep in the same bed. But you've got that beautiful, like that's the nicest dog bed I've ever seen. It's huge and it's cush, so that's going to be your spot. And he looked at me like, you just got here. I live here. I was like, all right, well, good point. But still, I insist. I was like, go ahead. No, he wasn't moving. And I was like, how do we do this? So I got a little bit more of my dog trainer stern voice and I got up taller and I was like, Otis, off the bed. No, not moving. So at this point, I'm like, man, like I don't want to deal with this right now. I was starting to lose some of my wah in that moment. So I'm like, all right, I'm gonna grab him by the collar and lead him off the bed. So I reach for his collar and he's like, ah. I was like, okay. Luckily I've been around enough dogs and big dogs, even aggressive dogs. It doesn't freak me out if a dog tries to bite me. I know I can prevent that. So he was trying to bite me. I was like, that's not gonna happen. So at that point, I was like, let's get the leash, click the leash on, lead him off. And for any people with dogs, like that's when the dog's not behaving, the leash is always a good way to reassert who's the alpha. So that was kind of a hilarious one. And then what I learned after that was I needed to remove things from around the bed that would allow him to jump up to it. Um, that's the first one. We could go on and on, but does that kind of scratch the itch of what you were looking for?
I got more itches. I've got hives. You could scratch the hives? Like, I need to hear some more.
Okay. What else would there be in that? Um, I don't know. I think I've been pretty lucky, skillful, discerning, filtering. Oh, and here's one though. Actually, what I was going to say is to finish that thought. Like, I have a lot of filters before I say yes to an opportunity. Like, I always speak with whoever it is whose home I'm going to take care of. I make clear what my requirements are. In that conversation, I'm monitoring who they are, right? And of course, that's not foolproof. Um, one of my very first gigs, though, was great because I was in this home and I was still learning about how does this, how does this whole thing work? And it's a bit weird. Like I've got a commitment to be here for 1 month, and then at the end of that month, I don't yet know where I'm going to be. So okay, well, I'm gonna, figure that out, and the universe is going to bring me something, and there's a whole process with that. And one of the things that's really cool about this is it requires, for me anyway, it requires consistent upgrades to my nervous system. Because there's a part of me, and maybe it's hardwired in most humans or all humans, that is like, if I don't know where I'm going to be, part of me is unsettled, worried, right? If I don't know where I'm going to sleep, right, I'm a little unsettled or a lot. So I'm figuring this out, and I arrange another stewarding gig to immediately follow this one, and literally worked it out that it would start the next day. And so it would mean leaving this house, getting on a plane, landing in this other place, and then taking care of this other place. I was like, perfect. Okay, great. I love it. So got it clear, bought my flights. I spoke with the owner of the place that I was in and said, okay, so this is what's going to happen. I'm going to leave on the date that we agreed on, and that was the day that that owner was flying back in. I was like, and if you'd like, I could drive your car to the airport, and then you'll have your car at the airport. Like, that's better for everyone. He's like, totally, that's great. I'm in. Good. Okay. 2 days later, the guy sends me a message. It says, hey, we have to talk. I'm like, okay. And he's like, really sorry, I'm going to come home early. I was like, huh? What do you mean? He's like, yeah, I have to come back 2 weeks before we'd said. I was like, well, 2 days ago, we made this whole agreement. I bought my flights. They happened to be business class flights. It was, pretty expensive. I arranged all this thing. And now I've got this like weird 2 week gap. And I was like, so one of the things I've discovered is it's very hard for humans to keep commitments. I include myself in that, right? And one of my most important practices is to make commitments and keep them. I'm like 98% on that. So, yeah, it brought up quite a challenging situation, that one. Um, needing to now, having had everything worked out, create more things and do different things and be here. I ended up, in one of the great ways that it worked out was I went to the new location early, and I was like, well, I could be in an Airbnb for a couple weeks, and then I just happened to speak with a friend who was from that area. He's like, "Hey, you could stay on my boat if you want." I was like, "What?" Like, "Yeah, stay on my boat. It's super cool." I was like, "Huh, okay." So I ended up spending some time on my friend's boat, which was one of the coolest experiences ever. So I guess that's an example in some way of the lead to gold, or the crack filling with gold. Um, yeah,
Hmm. How do you keep yourself accountable to doing the things that you say you're gonna do? I think a lot of people struggle with that, like you mentioned. It's been an observation. How do you do it?
yeah. Thank you for keying in on that part. I'm with you. It's one of the most basic important things as a requirement for, in my language, creating a vibrant life. My business is called The Art of Vibrant Living. And I didn't grow up knowing this by any means. I grew up in the normal American world, sad, standard American diet, not just food, but also ways of being. And it was normal to lie. It was normal to say one's going to do something and then just not do it. That that happens all the time. No big deal. And I remember very specifically the first time I did Landmark Education, their forum course. It was maybe like 2001, and they brought forward the concept of integrity being one's word in such a clear, specific way. I was like, ah, like it was so obvious to me then the importance of it. And not from a moralistic perspective, just simply because life doesn't work. We can't create. And I'll go woo woo for a moment on it by saying that we're such powerful creators. We can create anything. Call it manifestation, creation, taking a dream and making it reality. We can do that in phenomenal ways. However, we can't do that if we're teaching ourselves every day, I am a liar. If we're teaching ourselves every day, my word means nothing. And I'm saying all this in response to your question, George, because the first key to how to do it, how I do it, is knowing why, knowing the importance of it. Because nothing works for me in my life if I'm not confident, if I'm not trusting myself. And I can't trust myself if I don't fulfill the things I say. And the things I say to other people, like, you and I had an agreement to be here at a certain time today. Okay, so I keep my word to that. That's, in a way, that's easier than the ones I make to myself. Like, I'm going to go to the gym today, or I'm going to make sure I close my computer by 5 o'clock and not spend more screen time after that, whatever it is. The commitments I make to myself are equally important, and in some ways harder, because nobody would know, right? No one else knows if I did what I said.
Yeah, that's dieting, right? I'm gonna diet. I'm only gonna eat these certain things, but no one will know
Right.
if I sneak the ice cream,
Yeah.
you know? If I have an extra cup of coffee, it's just a little bit more. I shouldn't be doing the caffeine, whatever the scenario is, right? It's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
What about when people affect your ability to keep your word? You know,
Mm.
something else happens, domino effect, cascading into, I'm going to have to break my word.
Yeah. Well, there's two things on that. One is that a lot of times, in my experience, a lot of times, even though somebody else broke their word, and sometimes for really good reasons, right? Sometimes unavoidable, right? A car crash. I have a friend with a family emergency recently, and they dropped their commitment to me. And that did have a domino effect, like a whole bunch of other commitments I'd made. Now, but here's the distinction. Here's the distinction. One is that it's not necessarily impossible for me to honor my commitment. Sometimes it is. Though a lot of times it's just like, well, they showed up half hour late, so that means I'm half an hour late. Not necessarily. I still have authority. I still have the possibility of doing what I want. It might be harder. I might have to do something that's uncomfortable. So one of my practices, regardless of whether other people keep their commitments to me, I'm going to keep mine. Right? Even if it means I have to drive twice as far or work twice as hard. Still, what you said is true in that sometimes it's just not possible. So that's where we get to deepen the meaning of the word integrity and being one's word. It's not necessarily about always doing that exact thing. It's about keeping our word as intact as possible. So for instance, right, you and I are going to meet at whatever it was, 2:00 today. And if I was in a car accident just before our meeting, once I'd established safety for me and everybody else involved, the very first thing I would do was reach out to communicate with you. Right? Just to keep my word, to be my word, sometimes means just communicating, yeah, that thing I said I'm going to do, I'm not doing it, or at the time I said, here's my new commitment. I think of it as cleaning up or restoring integrity.
When is it okay not to keep your word? I'm assuming that there are probably instances where it's better to not keep your word.
Yeah. All right, cool. My brother George going for more nuance. I love it. The first, all right, two examples come to mind right away. One comes again. One of my greatest heroes is Mahatma Gandhi. And he's famous for a phrase, famous for many things, a phrase, be the change you want to see in the world. And in studying him and studying his life, one of the pieces that impressed me most about him is early in his marriage, he treated his wife badly, right? So badly, in fact, that they were in some kind of argument or some situation happened. He lost his cool and literally, and this is even painful to say, literally dragged his wife by her hair out of the house and threw her in the front yard. And he, over a period of time, came to realize that he was out of line, that he was treating her badly. He'd come from some conditioning that that behavior was almost normal. And so as he came into deeper and deeper realization of what his true integrity is, who he chooses to be, he made a policy that they keep the front door of his house open, literally open all the time, so anybody can look in and see what's going on. The other part that came to me is it's a famous philosophical example. We value truth, right? Being one's word, telling the truth. That's important. Generally agreed on in most cultures, not every culture. I learned in Bali that that's actually not a cultural base there. Like it's normal to lie there. That's okay. But you know, for most countries in the world, most of us grow up with this idea that lying is the right thing to do. So, what if there are, let's go with the classic example. What if it's Nazi Germany and I am hiding Jewish people in the basement, knowing that if they're caught, they're going to be killed? And then an SS officer comes to the door and says, are there any Jews here? My integrity in that moment would be to lie, right? would be, if I could do it in a way without being dishonest, cool. But certainly I'm not going to give them away if I can help it. So there's integrity, commitment to others. There's commitment to ourselves. What I said I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the gym. Right? However, if I say this morning, I'm going to go to the gym at 5 p.m., and my daughter calls me at 4:30 and says, Papa, I just had a car accident. I'm really scared, or, I'm kind of shaken up. Will you come help me? Well, then I'm not going to keep my commitment to the gym. It's superseded. I'm going to replace it with a higher commitment that's more in line with my true values and integrity.
So I'm looking at that equation thinking a couple different things. First thing is I'm thinking, if you don't keep your word, so in the Nazi Germany example, right? If it's going to save someone else to not keep your word, to not follow through, I mean, keep in mind, like, who made the commitment? Do I have to tell the SS? Like, did I make that formal agreement? Is there a contract there? Right? Maybe not. So maybe that situation is not the perfect thing. But to lie, because you brought up the idea of lying, integrity, right? Keeping word, integrity. There's, it's connected. There's a connection point. So if it doesn't harm somebody else, or if it saves somebody else, then it's okay, to do that. But it's not always saving one person and other person's not harmed. So there's always a choice. Sometimes, not always, but there's sometimes a choice. It's either your own integrity, if you are forced to lie in order to save someone else, because that, I think, will slowly erode your soul over time. Like they say, the first person you kill is the hardest. I've heard that before. I'm not going to tell anyone where, but I've heard that before. Everything you do after that becomes easier. So it's like, oh, wow, that's interesting. I mainly in the military, I think people in the military experience that, but that's why they also go through a lot of programming in the beginning, to just follow orders. They're the enemy. Anyone who doesn't look like you, speak like you, smell like you, whatever, they're the enemy. And it's a lot harder to fire on someone who looks like you, that's your neighbor in those kind of scenarios, right? Because you're connected on a visual level or whatever in your mind. So getting back to my original thought path was, how do you weigh who you're going to hurt if someone is going to be hurt by you not keeping your word? Is it the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, like in Star Trek? Or is it different?
That is one of the most beautiful questions of all time. And that's, in some ways, why we have religion and institutions and governments, right? Because it's challenging. Because in actual fact, there isn't a rule book that says, in this situation, here's the right thing to do and here's the wrong thing to do. Because life is infinitely complex. I remember playing this silly card game years ago called Hypotheticals. And it's like beyond hypothetical to something that's crazy theoretical. And the question came, if you could save all the political dissidents in the world, right? And I had to look up the word at the time. I'm like, what does dissident actually mean? Like all these political leaders that were unjustly imprisoned, who were doing good for the world, but they conflicted with a dictator or something. If you could free all of them, and in order to do it, you would have to kick a horse to death with steel-toed boots. Would you do it? I remember like really sitting with that, like, well, yes, I would, because that, like, Jonathan Mill, I studied philosophy in college, and it just comes to me now. I think it was Jonathan Mill who developed a theory called utilitarianism, I could be totally wrong. Philosophers, feel free to correct me later. Utilitarianism, and the basis of it is a unit of measure he called utils, UTIL. And in some way, what he was proposing, I don't think it really works, but proposing like, okay, freeing all the political dissidents in the world, that would be like 400 utils. And kicking a horse to death, that would be whatever that would be, 40 negative utils. That would be 40 units of harm compared to 400 units of good. Yeah. So I would do it. And it would be really, really, really hard. It's hard sometimes to make the quote, I don't even want to say it. I was going to say right choice, right? The choice that is, in my view, aligned with life, spirit, love. Like there's that common expression, what would Jesus do? What would love do? Even better, what would Jesus be? Who would Jesus be? Who would love be? So that the practice, the training is to create ourselves to become more and more loving so that when the situation comes, we're able to sit with the reality of the whole thing and make the best choice we can given who we are and what we know at that point. And just like we were talking about earlier, we'll look back on it in 20 years or 20 minutes and be like, I could have done that better. And life will give us another opportunity to be more loving in the future.
That's an interesting one. I wonder if Jesus would put on steel-toe boots and kick the horse to death.
Well, he wasn't shy when he turned over the tables in that market scene. So I don't know. But however, it does like it. I'm glad you said that because it brings me back to that conventional wisdom, the thing we've heard, that it's easier to kill the second time. Part of why that is because when we do something, typically we take on the identity of that. I'm someone who does that. I'm a killer, right? Which is I just heard a great commentary the other day. That movie years ago called Natural Born Killers, which for a lot of people was like too much. They couldn't watch it because these people, fictional characters, were so attuned to killing that it went against the identity of so the cultural values and identity of most people. So like, I can't even identify with those people. And if we can't identify with the protagonists, it's not a satisfying story. Yeah. So I don't know.
I wonder, equaling the playing field, I'll go one level deeper and then we can probably move on from this
Okay,
part of the conversation. And that is, in dystopian situation where it's you or the other guy, right? And I'm going to go a little bit deeper to say, you're not fighting over a can of food, or a truckload of food or a family, that you've got to feed. But it's literally you or the other guy. One of you, in order to live, needs to eat the other one. But you have to take the life in order to do it. So I want to ask the pacifist in you, since we brought the pacifist thing up, but I wanted to kind of at least touch on that before we moved into some other areas. How do you justify or how do you justify a decision, whatever that decision is, in that kind of scenario, especially if you know that you have, this is interesting. Say you both have two different ways. If you ever seen that movie, with Will Smith in it, where he's got the antidote, the solution to, stop the zombies, reverse the zombies. I forgot the name of that one, right? But let's say there was two different solutions, and you had a formula for eradicating a disease that's killing all of humanity. This other person has another formula that's different, but you both believe that your formula is the one that works. To layer on one more thing, which is by you surviving, you could save humanity. By that person surviving, they could save humanity. But truthfully, it could be either of you that has the formula that actually saves humanity. And you might be killing the only person who has that formula at the same time that you're killing them to survive yourself, to see if yours. So there's an ego angle to that as well. So just to toss that into the mix.
I love it. You would enjoy that game, hypotheticals. I can see that. Well, first thing is I will be just completely obnoxious and dismiss the question entirely on false ground. Common false ground, the common false ground in this physical world that we live in, since we are part human, we fall for the illusion that it's either or, that it's binary. That is a law of the physical world. However, we are not just physical beings, we are also spiritual beings. And so anytime I've trained myself this way. I remember first hearing it in philosophy school. It's called, in that world, in logic, it's called the fallacy of false alternatives. Right? In the more spiritual perspective, it's saying there's always another way. There's always another possibility. Right? Voltaire said, a conclusion is what you get to when you stop thinking. And that would be a limited way of looking at it, I would say, because it's not just thinking that brings us to new possibilities. It's imagination, exactly why Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge. So both and, okay, if this is all true, and it seems like this often, well, either I do or I don't, right? It's either do or die, me or him, win or lose. That's the paradigm that keeps us on this primitive planet. That's what creates war inside ourselves and in the world. So my first response is, I ain't playing that game. Now, mind you, I forget, because I am part human. I forget sometimes and think, well, I guess I'll just have to do it this way. Or I'm not going to take the time now to figure out another solution, so I'm going to do it in this way that I don't think is ideal. What would happen, though, to our world if we stayed a little bit longer in the uncertainty and the discomfort of, it seems like it's this or this, though I know there's another way? What wouldn't happen is war. It would be a different world. And that's where we're going. That's what we're creating. Thanks.
You look mighty tasty, boy.
Say again?
You look mighty tasty.
Yeah, you served me up
To the other guy.
mighty tasty, yeah.
You look mighty tasty.
Well, yes, and I'm not saying I'm going to roll over. I'm not saying, okay, well, go ahead, kill me. Not necessarily. Maybe I would decide that that's the highest good. I mean, when I was a kid and I heard this religious rhetoric, Jesus died for you, I was like, dude, I didn't ask for that. I'm not getting guilt tripped into anything here because somebody says that he died for me. No, I'm not. Right? After a spiritual awakening and after evolving something of my own self and my understanding of truth, I don't know, though, the idea that some dude willingly gave his life for something bigger, it's impressive. So maybe I'd be tasty. Maybe it would be a meal that would be good for everybody. I don't know.
Or maybe to your point, it doesn't have to be a yes or no or black or white decision. If you volunteered to be eaten, but you told the person what the formula was that you had, so that when that person escaped, survived however long they needed to survive without food, they've got both. And you could even tattoo it, on their body so they don't forget it, right?
I think one of your next incarnations is as a movie writer.
It could be. Yeah, I've always wanted to do that now that AI can pretty much write anything. I've always wanted to just like go into a cocoon for a while and write an epic science fiction space novel. That's just my like that's my weird little desire, dream that I want to do, right?
Yeah,
And then do
it
the
would be
soundtrack
awesome.
for it. Play on the
Oh,
soundtrack.
yeah.
So interesting. Yeah, I want to challenge you with that because I thought that's yeah, I want to touch on the pacifist side of things for a minute because you said a few things in our conversation that made me say, huh, I wonder how strongly, in what category does this person go down the pacifist path? Because you mentioned about Gandhi and some other things as well. So I was like, oh, that's very interesting. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, another of my greatest heroes is Martin Luther King Jr. You know, and studying his life, studying Gandhi's life, studying Jesus's life, it's like I'm not yet able to wrap my mind and being around the level of courage that those dudes had, right? The willingness to value love such that they're willing to be hurt and killed. Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of, it's my observation. I think we're entering into a time where everyone has to make that decision right now,
Mm.
over the next couple years, because life is hard, right? There are some things that just completely uproot you.
Mm.
And the easy path sometimes is to walk away from having to deal with issues, or saying I'm sorry, or apologizing, or realizing that you did made some mistakes, you hurt somebody else in the process, and ending it. But there's going to be a big struggle with identity, purpose. Where are we going? I don't think that anything has affected or will affect humanity like technology wise. Whether we created the wheel, it's like, oh my gosh, like we never have to walk again. No, people still walk, right? It's like they invented electricity, right? Or I should say discovered. Like all this stuff was discovered. It's never invented. Like it's been around for longer than recorded history is paying attention to it. But discovered electricity. Okay, great. Oh my gosh, we didn't have to light a candle. Candle makers are going to be out of business. No, they're not. Now we just have scented potpourri candles with, essential oils in them, right? Nothing's changed. People will still find a way of being productive and useful. However, with AI, I think it's going to be a bigger shift than most people realize because it's going to be an internal shift,
Mm.
not what people realize right now. I think we'll have this conversation 3 years from now. We'll be like, yeah, you know what? I was totally wrong. It's going to be something else, whatever that is. Whatever I thought was going to happen, it's going to be totally different.
Mhm.
You know, maybe when the mothership lands and the Greys and the Nordics and everyone else step out of it and they're like, okay, so here's what's really going on. We'll see what happens with that. Oh, I'm gonna just keep waiting for the next Stargate series to come out. But boom,
Well, say more though,
yep.
George, because I think you're starting to speak. I think there's more for you to say about more people will be invited into choosing love, even if it means them feeling hurt.
Yeah. So I mean, staying. Yeah. Thanks for getting me back on track. Uh, Staying with that, the choice to stay, the choice to become unbreakable or anti-fragile. About sewing in gold into the seams, into the cracks. When you fall down, you break things. I think that's going to be an everyday life scenario where money runs out. You don't know what to do. You're under the threat of being removed from your only home you've ever known, off of your family's land, and maybe that has been in your family for centuries. Off of knowing who you are, how you relate, maybe being forced into doing something that you would never have normally done in order to protect the people you love around you. I think that whether we're going into that because of AI or whether everyone in their life will experience something that will shake the ground underneath them stronger than any kind of a 9.0 earthquake, and then having the courage to get back up, even when you can't physically get back up. Something has happened. You've broken your legs out from underneath you. Someone else has broken them for you. You know, I think that we're entering into that situation. I think we're going to be faced with more of that these days. So these conversations, I think, are very important to me. You know, everything we talk about, because it just, through your experiences, through your stories, I think we're putting together pottery before it's been shattered. I think we're sewing in the gold into the cracks that we don't even know are there, that we don't even feel before they happen. Maybe in an alternate timeline.
Yeah. Well said. Beautiful. I appreciate your motivation and intention with this show, and being able to look at, like, yeah, there's probably some rough stuff coming, and if we can build our resilience and our hearts, and we have a much better chance of navigating it in a way that serves humanity. So thank you for doing that.
If you had to leave our listeners today with one thought that you could pass on, that created a shift in your life, that was profound for you, that may be heard by somebody at the right time when they needed it the most. The universe delivers this message through you, through this episode to them when they need it. What do you feel like God or the universe is calling you to tell people, if you want to leave them with one thing?
You are infinite. Like, literally infinite. Everything that is possible, you can be. So you creating yourself such that your life is a masterpiece, it's not only your birthright, it's a duty, it's an obligation. We are creators, and we're here to create our world through who we are into vibrancy, into beauty. And so if you're not experiencing yourself and your life as a masterpiece yet, I would love for you to know that you can, and for you to have the resilience and wisdom and courage, and to know that you deserve it, to just keep going until you feel that way. Your life is a vibrant masterpiece.
Daniel, how do people learn more about you?
Easy. My website, danielaaron.com. And the Aaron is like Aaron.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, and we'll see you on the next episode. If you've been waiting for a sign to finally reset to get your foundation solid, this is it. Join our 3-day online Unbreakable Bootcamp to help you build strength across your mind, your body, your emotions, and your finances. You can go to unbreakable.bootcamp.com right now and register while it's still free, or click the link in the description. Again, that's unbreakable.bootcamp.com.